Good evening, and welcome to tonight's edition of Book Talk. I'm Jon Obermeyer, your host, your author, and presenter. And tonight's book is Hear Me Out, which is my essay collection from 2023. The picture, of course, I always use my own pictures on the cover, and the picture is from Avila Beach. It's a beautiful sunset photograph taken out on the wharf. And this book is divided into 5 sections: memory and desire, origin stories, field notes from retirement, travels, and finally, write some things about writing. Normally in my essay collections, I cover a lot of territory just like on my poems. For example, there's a essay in here called Remembering a Town, which is my memory of a town called Greensboro where I lived for 28 years. I also have a little kind of vignette of Sunday volleyball players in Sacramento, and just kind of various topics, just like a poet would do. Basically, the essay is a poem without line breaks. There's one in here called Sabbath that I'd like to read to you from Origin Stories. See if I can find it here. One called Tide Pools might be even better. Tide Pools. A foggy morning in 1966 in what might be memory or a dream or the memory of a dream. The school activities bus has brought us to Arroyo Burro County Park, where a creek cuts through a gap in the white, chalky coastal cliffs, widening in a stagnant slough near the surf. A pond of lemon-lime color from the algae, which we are told to stay away from by our teachers. The second grade field trip proceeds out of the parking lot over the yellow-gray sandstone boulders that line the shore onto a flat prairie of cold gray sand. The girls walk, of course, in orderly fashion, carrying the sample buckets, while the boys drop their shovels and rakes to throw rocks and kelp bulbs at each other. The tide is fully out, moon drawn, which is why this day and hour has been selected for the excursion. Half a mile down the beach, the sand vanishes, replaced by orderly rows of jagged rock, looking like the jaws of a shark angling away from the cliff. Between each diagonal of rock is shallow seawater, warming slightly in isolation, trapped there but only temporarily. By that afternoon, the sun will be out and the waves will be breaking against the chalky cliff. I think of my life like a tide pool, the various constituents assembling in a miniature sea: starfish, fiddler crabs, mussels, mollusks, limpets, chitons, barnacles, empty bivalve shells, kelp, strands, driftwood, ocean debris like rope strands and loosened buoys, and particular to Santa Barbara, globs of oil seepage from the Monterey Formation. The tide pool and the human genome have much in common. What appears to be random assemblage is in fact a subtle, sophisticated ordering of life. How nature curates disparate elements using ocean currents, the moon's poles, and lines of sea-worn rock. Each life is complete unto itself. Our stories exist just below the surface and slightly offshore. Those important things are revealed when the ocean recedes on a foggy spring morning. So that's kind of a sample of how I returned to my childhood in Santa Barbara. And memoir is not only about recreating, it's not only about the nostalgia, but it's also about the rendering to make it entertaining, but also to show the import of how it influenced my life, or perhaps has more of a broader implication across my lives than the other lives. There's an essay in here called Stationery in Time. It's about a stationery store in Santa Barbara and kind of my love of things of paper and pencils. There's another wonderful essay in here about my class reunion and in Santa Barbara High that I went to, the 50th reunion. Here's one called Befriending Depression. People say I'm battling depression, and I reply, not me, I'm befriending depression and making it feel welcome. There's no battling it. It's not a fight. Depression is not a cold to get rid of. Depression is a descent into a mine shaft, a dark valley, the equivalent of your grave. You move backward into depression, which is lowercase, by the way, at a slow pace. At first, this feels off balance, but eventually it becomes natural, navigating with your heels instead of your toes. There's no lighting for your descent, not even flickering candles or a headlamp. At best, there are sections of rough sisal rope bolted to the cliff face to hang on to. You're not going to fall, though it feels like it. In necessary descent, there is no return route to the surface, no reversing course. The depth determines the benefits of it. Eventually, you acclimate to the darkness, and it's easier to see the route. Your hearing improves as a consequence. It starts out cold at the top, but gradually becomes warmer and comforting. The only exit is from the bottom, rock bottom, the nadir's portal into iron earth. There's also a great story in here, a personal memoir about a bookmark that I received when I bought a copy of Ulysses at the Green Apple bookstore in San Francisco, and how that bookmark led all the way to eventually meeting my former wife and the children that I'm now blessed with. So the bookmark is the story of that journey of how a simple bookmark placed in a book on the book counter and at a sales counter at a bookstore in San Francisco on Clement and Strick Street led all the way to North Carolina, to where I met my former wife and eventually we had two daughters together. This is really a fun book. I was retiring at the time that I wrote it, so there's a whole section called Notes on Retirement. One is called The Gift of Solitude, which is one of the things you uncover, and Imagining a Future Self. The future never spoke, nor will he, like the dumb, revealed by a sign, a syllable of his profound to come. Emily Dickinson. I understand the value of living in the moment, of dwelling in the single breath, but I'm also using this time of retirement/liberation to think about the future. To think about my future is ironic, isn't it, having lived 80%, maybe 90% of my life with so few years, maybe only 20% of my life or less remaining. Defying the actuary tables in family history, I might live another 5, 10, or perhaps 15 years, which would take me way beyond both grandfathers, smokers, dead in their mid-60s from massive heart attacks. The lifespan of my father, who passed at age 73 from a stroke, while failing short of my mother's current age in her late 80s, and my grandmother's and her mother's longevity, living to be 100. In fact, the sister of my grandmother lived to 107. Put longevity aside for a moment. I understand the future as a construct of time, which is itself a human construct. I'm more interested in how we think about the future. Where is the future actually located? Is it out there ahead of you in the distance, approaching you? Look at the words we use to describe the future. Are you looking forward to the future as it's physically out in front of you where you can see it? But that's not possible because you can't see the future. I believe, like the Hebrews, that the future is behind you, out of sight. The future sneaks up on you, coming around you and revealing itself to you out of your side vision. The future is not a head-on collision. The future is often surprising and unexpected. This is why we say that events, people, things, or ideas arrive out of left field or out of the blue. I imagine the future like a rushing blue stream that is slowly eroding a rock from behind me, breaking apart and reassembling that impermanent rock as gravel in deep pools downstream. You're not going to be made whole in the future in some sense of remaining the same. You're going to be made whole, but whole in a wholly different sense, a collection of loose gravel, formerly a distinct rock. Think of the future as a pleasant ambush, a kindly forgiven predator who sneaks up behind you while you're drinking obliviously at the water hole. You might look down and see its reflection in the water below you right before it taps you in the shoulder. I did not see that coming. Imagine the future or your future self is not easy. It's not like remembering a previous self, like the time when you were a child, a teenager, a college student, or even a young parent. In the 2021 TED Talk, Essential Questions About Your Future Self, psychologist Meg Jay notes that Our brains think about future selves in the way that we think about strangers. Our future self is a foreigner to us. We commonly say we don't realize what the future holds, but it's right there behind us, bearing gifts, bringing forth events and conditions we can't possibly predict. For example, my 2001 North Carolina based married business owner self could not have possibly imagined living completely on my own as a single adult near the Gulf of Mexico in Southwest Florida a decade later in 2011, employed as the marketing director in the field of cloud computing. My 2012 unemployed self could not possibly imagine myself living in Northern California in 2020 and 21, living in Berkeley, working as a grant writer for a San Francisco nonprofit. And there is no way that that previous self could imagine me living here in Oahu, on the island of Oahu, and doing charity work in the Philippines, helping to build a hospital in 2025. And given those arcs, where will I be in 2031, retired for almost a decade, with a 9-year-old granddaughter and possibly other grandchildren? It's entirely possible I might be living in Portland, Port Angeles, or even Portugal, and possibly running a nonprofit emerging from retirement to do so. The future. It's a foreign country with an unknown language. It boggles the mind. As you think about the future, don't think about what you will do and accomplish in the next 10, 15, 30 years, your health cooperating. But what do you want to be at age 75, 80, or 95? What qualities and attributes will you have then that you don't have now? Wisdom is the obvious thing we gain as we age, but I might also add kindness, empathy, compassion, and the capacity for greater self-care, all of which might be rolled up under the term wisdom. Most importantly, what will this time of extended rest and reflection allow for? What will retirement allow that was not possible when working full-time with a work and a social identity? Who will you be? That's just a sampling from this book. There's also many stories in here about travels that I've taken, and also things about writing. And I'm sorry for the blur there. And I really invite you to go on Amazon and pick up a copy of Hear Me Out Essays by Jon Obermeyer. Thank you so much.